The chair recognizes Congressman Bell for 5 minutes for questioning.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. As many of you know or are learning now, I represent the 1st Congressional District of Missouri, the Show Me State, and today I'm asking my Republican colleagues to show me where their principle stands when it comes to law enforcement, public safety, and respect for law. Local and federal enforcement coordinate all across the country, specifically in my state and my district. We see that all the time, and as a member of Congress, but also as a former judge and as a former prosecutor, these are things that happen all over the country in every county, if you will. And so quickly, because my time is short, Judge Doyle, did you have any comments on the detainer with respect to detainers? Because I heard some information that did not seem right to me that was spoken.
Thank you for that question, Representative Bell. Exactly. Detainers, immigration detainers, and the sheriff had explained this actually in his opening statement as well, are voluntary requests for cooperation. The way detainers, immigration, ICE detainers work at the moment is that they're voluntary. It is up to the receiving entity to determine whether they will honor the detainer or not. And additionally, some states like Massachusetts have laws or rulings by the courts that prevent prisons and jails from holding an individual past the time that they wrap their sentence.
Thank you. And so what I also want to get to is in 2021, Missouri, my home state, and I didn't support this, but they enacted the Second Amendment Preservation Act, also known as SAPA. Sheriff, are you familiar with that?
Sorry, I'm not.
No problem, no problem. It was struck down as unconstitutional, but before we get to that, this law declared certain federal firearm regulations as essentially illegal in the state. So under SAPA, if a local police department cooperated with agencies like the ATF in enforcing gun safety laws, it could face fines of up to $50,000. As a result, law enforcement officers across the state were forced to withdraw from federal task forces, stop sharing critical crime data, and limit their ability to crack down on gun trafficking and violent crime. This reckless policy was not just bad law, it was unconstitutional, and it was finally found unconstitutional by the courts. Unlike so-called sanctuary laws, Missouri's SAPA law was ultimately struck down, but because it expressly countermanded federal law and violated the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, which ensures that federal law is the law of the land and cannot simply be ignored or negated by individual states. So now here's where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. So just last week in this very committee, I listened to my Republican colleagues argue at length that state and local law enforcement should step into the shoes of federal immigration enforcement and do the federal government's job for them. They insisted that cities undermine the rule of law, by exercising their sovereign right to put public safety over immigration enforcement and decline ICE's voluntary civil requests, because that's what they are, to detain someone longer than the law permits. They even went so far as to argue that cities and states that fail to meet Donald Trump's immigration policy demands should lose all federal funding. The reality is that unlike the SAPA law, none of these laws conflict with federal law. None of them prevents ICE from doing its job or carrying out federal immigration policy, and none of them prevent cities from cooperating closely with federal law enforcement across a range of areas, as cities have been doing every day. But when it comes to gun laws, suddenly those same Republican lawmakers are nowhere to be found. They actively supported the SAPA law, a law that actually did prevent the federal government from executing its policies by prohibiting local law enforcement from enforcing federal gun laws, and incredibly threatening police officers with penalties for simply working to keep illegal firearms out of the hands of violent offenders. So it seems like Republicans are trying to have it both ways. So I'm asking, where do Republicans stand? deprioritizing public safety and burning the relationships that they've built with their communities? Are we, where's the consistency? And I didn't hear anyone say, oh, this is a problem with that law, with the coordination of local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. But now all of a sudden we're seeing this requirement that local law enforcement do the job, not the coordination and working together, but the requirement to do the job. And so I yield back.
The gentleman yields, point of order.
The time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I hope I get that same extra 30 seconds.
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely. I had, the chair had acknowledged earlier the generous use of time.
You are
I'm honored to extend that generous use of time to my colleague,